Let's continue to read the book by Sam Harris, Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. I'm reading on the right-hand side. It's easy enough to find fault with romantic ideas about Eastern wisdom, and a tradition of such criticism sprang up almost the instant the first Western seeker sat cross-legged and attempted to mediate. In the late 1950s, the author and journalist Arthur Koestler traveled to India and Japan in search of wisdom and summarized his pilgrimage thus: I started my journey in sackcloth and ashes, and came back rather proud of being a European. In The Lotus and the Robot, Koestler gives some of his reasons for being less than awed by his journey to the East. Consider, for example, the ancient discipline of Hatha Yoga. Well, now generally viewed as a system of physical exercises designed to increase a person's strength and flexibility. In its traditional context, Hatha Yoga is part of a larger effort to manipulate subtle features of the body unknown to anatomists. No doubt, much of this subtlety corresponds to experiences that yogis actually have, but many of the beliefs formed on the basis of these experiences are patently absurd, and certain of the associated practices are both silly and injurious. Koestler reports that the aspiring yogi is traditionally encouraged to lengthen his tongue, even going so far as to cut the frenulum, the membrane that anchors the tongue to the floor of the mouth, and stretch the soft palate. What is the purpose of these modifications? They enable our hero to insert his tongue into his nasopharynx, thereby blocking the flow of air through the nostrils. His anatomy thus improved. A yogi can then imbibe subtle liquors believed to emanate directly from his brain. These substances, imagined by recourse to further subtleties to be connected to the retention of a semen, are said to confer not only spiritual wisdom but immortality. This technique of drinking mucus is known as Kachari Mudra, and it is thought to be one of the crowning achievements of yoga. I'm more than happy to score a point for Koestler here. Needless to say, no defense of such practices will be found in this book. Criticism of Eastern wisdom can seem especially pertinent when coming from Easterners themselves. There is indeed something preposterous about well-educated Westerners raising East in search of a spiritual enlightenment, while Easterners make the opposite pilgrimage, seeking education and economic opportunities. I have a friend whose own adventures may have marked a high point in this global comedy. He made his first trip to India immediately after graduating from college, having already acquired several yogic affectations. He had the requisite beads and long hair, but he was also in the habit of writing the name of the Hindu god Ram in Devanagari script over and over in a journal. On the flight to the motherland, he had the good fortune to be seated next to an Indian businessman. This very traveler thought he had witnessed every species of human folly until he caught sight of my friend's scribbling. The spectacle of a Western-born Stanford graduate of working age, holding degrees in both economics and history, devoting himself to the graphomaniacal worship of an imaginary deity in a language he could neither read nor understand, was more than this man could abide in a confined space at 30,000 feet. After a testy exchange, the two travelers could only stare at each other in mutual incomprehension and pity, and they had 10 hours yet to fly. There really are two sides to such a conversation, but I concede that only one of them can be made to look ridiculous. We can also grant the Eastern wisdom has not produced societies or political institutions that are any better than their Western counterparts. In fact, one could argue that India has survived as the world's largest democracy only because of institutions that were built under British rule. Nor has the East led the world in scientific discovery. Nevertheless, there is something to the notion of a uniquely Eastern wisdom, and most of it has been concentrated in or derived from the tradition of Buddhism. Buddhism has been of special interest to Western scientists for reasons already hinted at. It isn't primarily a faith-based religion, and its essential teachings are entirely empirical. Despite the superstitions that many Buddhists cherish, the doctrine has a practical and logical core that does not require any unwarranted assumptions. Many Westerners have recognized this and have been relieved to find a spiritual alternative to faith-based worship. It is no accident that most of the scientific research now done on meditation focuses primarily on Buddhist techniques. Another reason for Buddhist prominence among scientists has been the intellectual engagement of one of its most visible representatives, Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama. Of course, the Dalai Lama is not without his critics. My late friend Christopher Hitchens meted out justice to His Holiness on several occasions. He also castigated the Western students of Buddhism for the widely and lazily held belief that Oriental religion is different from other faiths, less dogmatic, more contemplative, more transcendental, and for the blissful, thoughtless exceptionalism with which Buddhism is regarded by many. Hitch did have a point. In his capacity as the head of one of the 4 branches of Tibetan Buddhism and as a former leader of the Tibetan government in exile, the Dalai Lama has made some questionable claims and formed some embarrassing alliances. Although his engagement with science is far-reaching and surely sincere, the man is not about consulting an astrologer or oracle when making important decisions. I will have something to say in this book about many of the things that might have justified Hitch's opprobrium, but the general thrust of his commentary here was all wrong. Several Eastern traditions are exceptionally empirical and exceptionally wise, and therefore merit the exceptionalism claimed by their adherents. Buddhism in particular possesses a literature on the nature of the mind that has no peer in Western religion or Western science. Some of these teachings are cluttered with metaphysical assumptions that should provoke our doubts, but many aren't, and when engaged as a set of hypotheses by which to investigate the mind and deepen one's ethical life, Buddhism can be an entirely rational enterprise. Unlike the doctrine of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the teachings of the Buddhism are not considered by their adherents to be the product of an infallible revelation. They are rather empirical instructions. If you do X, you will experience Y. Although many Buddhists have a superstitious and cultic attachment to the historical Buddha, the teachings of Buddhism presented him as an ordinary human being who succeeded in understanding the nature of his own mind. Buddha means a weakened one, and Siddhartha Gautama was merely a man who woke up from the dream of being a separate self. Compare this with the Christian view of Jesus, who is imagined to be the son of the creator of the universe. This is a very different proposition, and it renders Christianity, no matter how fully divested of a metaphysical baggage, all but irrelevant to scientific discussions about the human condition. The teachings of Buddhism and of Eastern spirituality generally focus on the primacy of the mind. There are dangers in this way of viewing the world, to be sure. Focusing on training the mind to the exclusion of all else can lead to political quietism and hive-like conformity. The fact that your mind is all you have, and that it is possible to be at peace even in difficult circumstances, can become an argument for ignoring obvious societal problems. But it is not a compelling one. The world is in desperate need of improvement. In global terms, freedom and prosperity remain the exception. And yet, this doesn't mean we need to be miserable while we work for the common good. In fact, the teachings of Buddhism emphasize a connection between ethical and spiritual life. Making progress in one domain lays a foundation for progress in the other. One can, for instance, spend long periods of time in contemplative solitude for the purpose of becoming a better person in the world, having better relationships, being more honest and compassionate, and therefore more helpful to one's fellow human beings. Being wisely selfish and being selfish can amount to very much the same thing. There are centuries of anecdotal testimony on this point, and as we will see, the scientific study of the mind has begun to bear it out. There is now little question that how one uses one's attention moment to moment largely determines what kind of a person one becomes. Our minds and lives are largely shaped by how we use them. Although the experience of a self-transcendence is in principle available to everyone, this possibility is only weakly attested to in the religious and philosophical literature of the West. only Buddhists and students of Advaita Vedanta, which appears to have been heavily influenced by Buddhism, have been absolutely clear in asserting that spiritual life consists in overcoming the illusion of the self by paying close attention to our experience in the present moment. Okay, let me stop here. Thank you for listening.